Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Thank you for tuning in. Welcome back. It's another edition of Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today from the Calgary area, talking with Gitz Crazyboy. New book is out called The Res Doctor, a graphic novel from Highwater Press. So I've got to ask right away, sir, Gitz Crazyboy, tell me about the name. How'd that come about?
Um, there's the colonial name that I have, the one that like when the renaming began, the colonization with our people, through the residential schools, my mother and father were given the name Hazel Crazyboy. Sorry, that was a generation before my mom. The Crazyboy came, and then got passed on to my mom. My dad's name from his family went from being Diskilene, which is the keeper of the water, and Dinnisithene, became Deranger in English. So my name is Ryan Deranger, but my real name, Sixagatesit name, my Blackfoot name is Gitsikakamin. And I think my mom's last name, which is Crazyboy. But in Blackfoot, our name would be Makoyi Sepo, which is wolf plume. I took the name, like Gitsikakamin's pretty hard to say, so I shortened that down to Gitz Crazyboy. The next step, though, my evolution is to go from Crazyboy to Makoyi Sepo.
And
so,
yep.
In about a year or two, maybe 2 years, I'll be Gitz Makoyi Sepo.
I'll have to practice that, but take me a bit of time to get my tongue around that. But hey, that's all the joy about living and learning, right? You just carry on and absorb new influences and new ideas, and hope you come out better at the end. So, Gitz Crazyboy, you grew up where? Tell us about your early life.
I was born in Calgary, Multikinsis, Alberta, and then I was raised on the res for a few years, which is my mom's side in Brockett, Piikani First Nations, and we moved from Piikani to Fort McMurray, which is up in northern Alberta, on my dad's side, and moved in McMurray in the late 80s, 89, 90s when I moved up there, and from there I stayed there till I graduated in the mid 2000s. And it was interesting growing up because, like, my parents are both heavily colonized through the residential schools and conditioned. So I grew up very much Roman Catholic, and Catholic, Christian, Anglican. It didn't matter as long as you were in church on Sunday. You had to go. So we had to go, which is like midnight mass, all that jazz. Getting to church early for some reason to get like seats so you can sit down, and just being conditioned to like believe that there's only one God, and it's to Jesus Christ. As I got older, I began to reconnect with my roots. I had very limited exposure growing up. They couldn't quite kill the connection to spirit in both my parents. They tried to as best as they could. And I was raised as a Roman Catholic, but that exposure to those sundances, to the Agotsusin, the sweat lodges, to, when we sit down with our Blackfoot societies, those resonated with me. So as I got older, I stripped myself of the colonial God, and I started reconnecting. Once I graduated from high school, I began to travel all around Turtle Island, living with different Indigenous folks, with their nations, learning as best as I could, and then coming back home. And then I came back to Fort Mac, started working in the schools in like the late 2000s. Back in my old high school, back in like the other high schools that had after school programs. It was pretty successful. And then the Fort Mac fire hit. And I was one of the evacuees. I got stuck in the fire, almost burned to death.
Oh.
And then that was enough for me to be like, okay, well, I got to move down to back home to Treaty 7 territory, back to Multikinsis. And I've been here since the Fort Mac fire. And I've just been reconnecting. I was raising my daughter, getting my master's in education, writing, just trying to improve my life as best as I could.
And you're an actor, an author, an activist, a youth educator. How do you find time in your busy life for all of those different, I'll call them roles, but the passions of yours?
I mean, it had to be something I had to believe in. Like, I really had to just be excited about it, in order for me to, like, even want to act and stuff. So, or like, like a friend will say, come check this out or try this out or whatever. And, that's kind of fun stuff to do. Getting in front of the camera, getting behind that world. I love to write, though. I love to create. I love to tell stories. I love to hear stories. If I had a choice between listening to elders or writing stories, I'd always pick listening to the elders. There's just a way that they communicate. You sit down with a really good storyteller. You're in a time machine, and you're in a spaceship. You're going places that you never thought were possible. When you get with a really good storyteller, and it's a little different with like the Blackfoots, because sometimes sometimes you'll hear a song from that moment in time, and it's like you're there. It's like you're there as history was written. You could feel it, you could taste it, you could hear it. It's almost like you could touch it. It's like right there. So I have to get involved in these things, but I really have to believe in what they are. Being a dad always came first, though, so I had to like slow down with some of the stuff that I was doing, because that happens when you have kids. You know, that old person, that young person, that single person is no longer there when you have your child.
Exactly.
The kids come first.
Exactly. And without being facetious, I guess you don't have to go to 23andMe to find out where your ancestors are, do you?
No, I just go down the street, you know. I always tell this with people, like when they try to wax like political or poetic when it comes to like finding out who we are. It's like, oh, it's nuanced. It's like, no, it's not nuanced. I can take you to my res. I'll introduce you to the auntie who likes me, or I can introduce you to the auntie who doesn't like me. Yep. Like, I know where I'm from.
Right. And my family farm is down the road here, so I can always go see my aunt, who's the last living relative of that generation. So I know what you're talking about, but not quite in such an enormously spiritual, profound way. And we're with Gitz Crazyboy. We call him that because that's what he calls himself, and that's fine with me. Gitz Crazyboy, the Res Doctor. Now, that's the first actual graphic novel I have ever read, and within one sitting, I had to read it, and it was very captivating and intriguing, and I really loved it. But what was the inspiration from your part for that story?
There was an action. It's loosely based on this doctor who's from here. He's from Treaty 7. He's Blackfoot. He's super he's super reserved. He's really it's funny how humble he really is. And I remember when I think Highwater approached me to do this. They had a list of names, and I was like, they're all cool. They're all great people, but I was like, if I can get this one person, because I know who he is, and I know his story, and it's pretty trippy. It's just like bringing a story of one of our successes back to our people. And you could sit down with him and talk to him about, Curb Your Enthusiasm or movies or music. And not once will he ever be like, I'm a doctor. I work with my people. I'm like, he's definitely the exact opposite of like a TikTok persona. He would never know, and he's just amazing in that sense. So even getting the okay was a thing. I had to sit down, we had to talk, and then the story was like another thing. And he kept saying, he's like, it's not the exact thing of my life. You have to say it's loosely based. He's like, because I don't want people to think what you're telling is the exact story. Because if it went to the exact story, there's no way I could fit it into like just one graphic novel. It would be like volumes. Because he has an interesting story of going from grade school, middle school, high school, post-secondary, and he's gone through all of those things that we go through living on the res and being estranged from our culture and going through the traumas and tragedies of our people and having parents, grandparents who just really love you and believe in you, and finding himself. It's just he's just such an amazing and wonderful human being. That was the inspiration, though. I really just wanted to bring that success story to our Blackfoot people, but there's so much things there's so much oppression that we have through colonization that there's so many parallels we have with different nations across Turtle Island. There's characters in that story, even though they're from a Lethbridge area. We have them in our lives. We know who they are. We interact with them all the time.
And from there, does that help you understand more, or even in your own life, the challenges for Indigenous youth with academic ambitions? I know lots of people, no matter what their background, you get to a certain stage and people in the family say, oh no, you can't do that, and nobody's ever gone to university from our house. Oh, you can't do that in our area. No, you got to come back to the farm, or you got to take over the family business. There's the same kind of problems arise, or even more so in Indigenous culture.
That there is you're always gonna have the haters in your family. Like, you're always gonna have the people who set the bar really low, but that's one aspect. But I find we're celebrating more and more of our successes. I remember, and I'm hearing it less and less, and it's something I celebrate. And when I do work with kids, it's like, hey, when someone's doing something and they're like excelling to get like a good mark, they're not white. Like, you got to stop saying that. Like, you're so white. It's like, you're excelling. Celebrate that.
Yeah.
But it's the institution that is so rigid and makes it almost impossible for us to maintain our humanity, to maintain our authenticity as Indigenous peoples, and still graduate. There's all of these sacrifices along the way that you have to give up in order to get that degree, that master's, that doctorate, those certificates. Like, you have to lose a part of yourself. And it doesn't have to be that way, but in this current world, the biggest stumbling block, the biggest hurdle we have to overcome is the academic institution. Some are changing, but some are very rigid in their beliefs. And some professors and deans and even like the administration, they're so rooted in that colonial ideology, it becomes almost impossible.
And you'd think it would be the other way around, because they're, on the other hand, the ones that are pushing, I'll say, for more inclusion and diversity, and yet at the same time they're resisting it. So that's kind of a strange paradox.
Yeah, but I mean, like, the academic world, supposedly the forefront of like enlightenment, they all they've done generationally, because it's not a problem just popped up like this last 10 years, generationally, almost through its existence, it's always been about mining Indigenous cultures for their wisdom, celebrating those who bring it back as the discoverers of that knowledge, when we've always had it and maintained it. If you look at someone like Wade Davis, he's an ethnobotanist, but he considers himself a discoverer of different like psychotropic drugs or medicines. Yet all he was in reality is just a conduit of this information. We took it from one culture and brought it to the other. Unfortunately, the way academia is, they celebrate that individual and not the communities. So he brought nobody with him on his way to becoming a world-renowned doctorate of ethnobotany. He's all celebrated, and we're like footnotes. And that's just how this system is. It shouldn't be like that, though.
But I guess the only way to change it is to keep pushing those boundaries, keep pushing the envelope, as they say in The Right Stuff. Is that the only way to do it, or is there other ways to expand this whole area?
I think the gradual change for academia to becoming, like, in this age of reconciliation, I wish we would see it in our lifetime. I don't think we're going to see it in our lifetime. We're building the pathways forward, and I honestly believe the pathway forward for every academic institution, whether it's like ECS all the way to like post-secondary, instead of having like an Indigenous studies, you're going to have a like local Indigenous nation. So rather than like being in Alberta and learning about the Haudenosaunee, if you're in Treaty 7, you're learning about the Tsuut'ina, you're learning about the Yarhe Nakota, you're learning about the Blackfoot. You're not, because you can't quantify any information outside of Treaty 7. Like, you can't say, well, this Cree elder told me this about birch bark canoes. You're like, well, how do we know that's true? Where if someone said, like, the buffalo hunt, you could be like, oh, yeah, well, we have 3 different nations to draw information from. So we can go down and take the Blackfoot and bring them up, and, a knowledge keeper talk about the Blackfoot, the buffalo hunt.
Yep.
We could go to the Yarhe Nakota or the Tsuut'ina, and we can bring them all in, and we can all learn something very vital and important. I think that is the way forward, and that's the only real way we can quantify our knowledge and also simultaneously protect it.
And back to The Res Doctor, the graphic novel written by Gitz, Crazyboy, with help from three other folks we'll get to in a moment. But it comes down to, I think, the main characters that I gleaned from it anyway were the family support that the person in the book, Ryan Fox, received along the way. And he had his ups and downs and pitfalls and partying and things like that. But it seemed like there was always the backbone of the family that kept him going. Is that some of the messages you hope to get across with this book?
I mean, yeah, that's just it. No matter what we do, we're having our moms, our grandmas, that one person to always fall back on. Like we are community people. We're communal minded people, but we're not communists. Like we're socialists. We live socially, but we're not socialists. We know our family. We know that our family supports us, loves us, and celebrates us. And I don't think there's an Indigenous person who's still ideologically connected to their communities and their families that gets through university or that gets these gigantic accomplishments without having their support and their love behind them. I don't know if that's. I've yet to meet that one Indigenous person that's like, I did it all on my own.
Right, and the book is The Res Doctor. Gitz Crazyboy is the writer, but tell us about the illustrations and the coloring and by Veronica Baranova, Asby Whitecalf, Tobin Rasico. How did that enter into the thing? You write the script, I'll call it. What happens then?
It becomes like a conversation. And if you're like a control freak and you're an author and you want to do a graphic novel, like if you can't let go,
right,
you better learn how to draw.
Right.
What was great about these conversations is I would have the idea of how I wanted to look, how many panels per page. And it, like, there's almost like not really a science, but there's a method of panels per page. And when you're kind of leading up to a moment. And that's different than writing a story, like just a novel or novella or a short story. So in the beginning, I would say this is how I wanted to look. And when I would get back was exactly what I explained, but it was missing something. So when I would write to them, I'd be like, well, this is how I want the pictures to feel. When I said that, those artists took my brief instructions and they made something so incredibly beautiful. It surpassed my own imagination. And I love that, but at that moment I'm like, oh man, this is how I want it to look. But even as I got exactly what I wanted, it wasn't what I needed. And they just took it to the next level. And you have to have that give and take with your editor, who was amazing. She was awesome. And with the artist as well, you have to let that go and do your best to have that interaction.
And it seems like collaboration in all fields seems to be, what's that old saying about the sum of the parts or the whole is greater? Anyway, it's like the Guess Who, Bachman Turner combination writing songs probably better than the ones they could do on their own. The Beatles probably better than the ones they've done on their own, more or less. So is that kind of the thing that you found out doing this work?
Yeah, I mean it is super important, the collaborative part. And it's like I just learned that this last 2 years. I took my daughter to a traditional hide camp last year, and this year I hosted one. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it to it. But we brought out these people who were to make the hides, and it was that moment where I realized when you drop an animal and you're skinning, you take extra care as you're removing the hide from the animal for the person that's going to take that hide, because they have a lot of work, and if you aren't careful, you make their job way harder, and the things that they're making are going to people who need it. Whatever they're turning that hide into, leather, if it's going to be like a jacket or moccasins or leggings or even like a wedding outfit.
Yeah. And
that one always kind of blew my mind. It's like, oh, this thing that we're doing is actually, you don't know where it's going to end up when because you hunt and you drop something, but you have no idea where it's going to end up. So even from the beginning, even as before you go out, when you make your prayers, before you even leave the house, there's an end destination for that meat, that hide, that love and the energy you're putting in. And it's like when you're collaborating on a book, it's almost the same way. Like, I have no idea who's going to pick this up. I have no idea who's going to read it. I have no idea how they're going to interpret it. I have no idea how it's going to affect their lives, but I want to put as much love into it as I can. So when that person does pick it up, I've done a good enough job on my end that they somehow, hopefully, are impacted in a really beautiful way.
And that's wonderful. And the book is The Res Doctor. Gitz Crazyboy is the author. Lots of help from other people, and we're talking about collaboration, and that is the key. What do you hope, sir, that the book will accomplish? What are your wildest dreams for the title, The Res Doctor?
I mean, if I allow myself to dream a little dangerously, if I allow myself to dream big, I mean, like every author who says, like, oh, I don't really, I don't think it'd ever be a bestseller. They're like, we all have that thing. We all want it to be a bestseller. We all want it to just break the mold. If I allow myself to dream dangerously, there's a youth or Indigenous youth out there, or an Indigenous person of any age that'll pick this up, that'll be inspired, but they have the full capabilities to tell a better story. And hopefully it awakens that thing inside of them to tell those stories in a more profound way than I ever could. So, like, just to hopefully set some kind of standard that I know our people can easily surpass. Because I'm not the best storyteller, I'm not. And I know that there's somebody out there, because we have so much hidden talent on every res, every urban community. We have that. It's there. And that's what I wish, is that they just picked up, like, oh, I can do better, and then they do better. And if it was like more aside from like, being like a bestseller, turning it into a screenplay.
Wow. And I can see that. I can see Andrea Menard as one of the main characters, because we've had a conversation with her too, and she's just such a great person. And my soon-to-be daughter-in-law is an actor, and she's wonderful. She's been on, what's that show about Chicken News? Something like that? Chicken Feather News? I can't remember.
Oh, the Feather?
Feather, yeah. She's been on that show.
Who's your daughter-in-law?
Andrea.
Okay.
Andrea Folster. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah, she's
don't know them.
She's gonna be soon to be our daughter-in-law. Well, she is in spirit, so let's leave it at that. What more do we need, right? And I think also The Res Doctor, for let's say Indigenous audience, it's a damn good story. I think you're a pretty good writer, so a good storyteller there. So take it from me. So one more question, Gitz, what's next for you?
The next project I have is a bit secret. I can't say anything.
Okay.
You'll definitely, when it drops, you'll definitely be the one I'll talk to again. I'll be like, this is the thing I couldn't talk about. Here it is. We can talk about it now.
Okay.
Aside from that, slowly working away at an Indigenous teen series.
Great.
And that's what I've been working on for the past couple of years. If I was to give it my elevator pitch, it would be Indigenous mythologies told in the most punk rock way possible.
I got it. It's a hit right there.
Hopefully.
Well, stories come from all over the place. We got Greek mythologies, we have Christian mythologies, we have British royalty mythologies, we have Canadian hockey mythologies. So all sorts of myths that can be turned into actual stories with good lessons that are also fun to experience. So, Gitz Crazyboy, best of luck. Thank you very much for an enlightening conversation, and all the best to you.
Thank you so much. Look forward to hearing it.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.